Hello guys, welcome back to our anime moments. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of upcoming episode of Soul Land 3 Legend of the Dragon King Part 12 based on novel. So let's start. With narrowed eyes, Sentai picked up Tang Wulin's form. Follow me. He had to see for himself what level Mang Qian's disciple had attained. The so-called testing room was actually just a forging room. Naturally, a blacksmithing test needed to be conducted in a room such as this. As soon as he entered the forging room, Tang Wulin's nervousness eased a bit. The forging room was about the same as Mang Qian's. This was the first time since he arrived he found himself within a familiar environment. The surveyor was a middle-aged woman who evidently knew Sentai. Grandmaster Sentai, you've personally brought someone to take the test. I just heard that this child is only 9 years old. If he was just a bit younger, he would be able to attack the president's record. Sentai said, we can talk after the test. The surveyor nodded and looked towards Tang Wulin. There are 15 kinds of metal here. Pick one of them to purify. I will grade you based on the metal you choose and the degree of purification. If your score surpasses 60, then you'll earn the title of a rank 1 blacksmith. Yes. Tang Wulin nodded, then looked towards the metals arranged on the stand. 15 different metals. Each and every one of them was 1/3 of a meter squared. The metals had all sorts of colors and qualities. Although the blacksmith test seemed simple as one only needed to purify a metal, it actually examined more than one's purification abilities. The surveyor didn't tell him what these metals were, indicating that he needed to identify and understand each of the metals himself while picking the one best suited to his abilities. The metals' qualities and purification results were tied together, meaning the purification score would be affected by the chosen metal. Tang Wulin swept his gaze over them and instantly recognized what he had to work with. After some pondering, he picked a metal from the middle of the shelf. The chunk of metal twinkled with a faint silver light. When they saw him pick this metal, Sentai and the surveyor both revealed a trace of shock in their expressions. They never expected Tang Wulin to choose such a thick and heavy metal. I choose this chunk of heavy silver. Tang Wulin picked up the heavy silver and then placed it on the forging table without making the slightest sound. Mang Qian's demands of him had been very high. He forbade him from allowing the sound of metal colliding with metal to sound out unless he was forging. This chunk of heavy silver with dimensions of 1/3 meters squared actually weighed over 300 kilograms. It was extraordinarily heavy, however. Sentai saw Tang Wulin pick it up with no effort at all. Little guy, your strength truly isn't small. The surveyor exclaimed in astonishment. She was slowly thinking that the 9-year-old boy in front of her could actually pass the blacksmith's test. Tang Wulin said, Masters, may I begin now? The surveyor said, you may begin. You have 1 hour to finish. Purify it as much as you can. The degree of its purification will determine your score. Yes? Tang Wulin didn't have any needless thoughts, and began to work skillfully. He immediately set to work by starting up the forging table and increased its temperature. After this he put the heavy silver inside and began calcining it. The time required to calcine the metal was also counted in the time he had to purify it. The blacksmith's test didn't have any tricks to it. The association had strict requirements for all of their blacksmiths, as their work directly reflected upon their reputation. Tang Wulin took in deep breaths and stretched while he adjusted the soul power within his body. The reason he chose heavy silver wasn't because he wanted to show off to his peers, rather it was the last metal he had forged with. After his initial forging of it, he had gained a thorough understanding of its characteristics. Furthermore, the chunk he picked was also very similar to the one he had forged with originally. It was like seeing someone else hunting, and being excited by one's memories of the thrill of the hunt, and so before he knew it, he had chosen it. However, he still remembered Mang Qian's words. He mustn't use his 1,000 refined heavy silver hammers unless he was alone. At the very least, he couldn't reveal his 1,000 refined heavy silver hammers until he was 15 years old. Tang Wulin gradually adjusted his breathing as he watched the metal's temperature on the forging table and sharpened his gaze. Sentai stood to the side motionlessly as he watched Tang Wulin. When he saw Tang Wulin's gaze sharpen, he couldn't help but secretly exclaim in his heart, "Oh, Mang Tian. You've truly picked up a gem." Senta Yu was the greatest advocate of single-minded devotion to forging within the blacksmith community. He wasn't particularly talented, it was just that he liked the profession. He had gotten to where he was now by proceeding one firm step at a time, whilst relying solely on his love and devotion to forging. In the end, he gained the acknowledgement of the blacksmithing world. Tang Wulin was just a 9-year-old child. A 9-year-old child was actually able to achieve such a state of concentration. This meant that he truly understood the meaning of forging. When faced with such a child, Senta Yu's expression immediately brightened. Tang Wulin's left hand quickly pressed the button, bringing it out of the forging table at just the right temperature. Hastily, the surveyor began writing this down. As the surveyor of the blacksmith's ranking test, she was extremely experienced in her role. From Tang Wulin's details, she could determine that this wasn't the child's first time forging heavy silver. How could a blacksmith who hadn't even registered yet truly forge heavy silver? Tang Wulin began. His two arms shook a bit as a pair of 1,000 refined tungsten hammers appeared in his hands. He dexterously lifted up his left arm and tapped the heavy silver twice, issuing a ding-ding sound. Senta Yu's gaze switched to Tang Wulin's ears. He clearly saw Tang Wulin's ears tremble slightly. He's listening to the feedback of the metal. What an excellent lad! Right at that moment, Tang Wulin's right arm hammered down with lightning speed. The whole forging room was filled with a whistling sound, and in the next instant, the tungsten hammer heavily landed on the chunk of heavy silver. Peng! The tungsten hammer sang a note as the heavy silver depressed inwards a bit. Tang Wulin's pair of large, pretty eyes began shining at that moment as the hammer in his left hand quickly followed. Peng! Another boom resounded in the room. The two booms echoed within the room while Senta Yu's eyes widened a bit. Those are 1,000 refined tungsten hammers. How old was this child? Yet he was unexpectedly able to use such heavy 1,000 refined tungsten hammers? It was known that some of the rank 2 blacksmiths couldn't even use a single hammer weighing 40 kilograms, let alone a pair of 1,000 refined tungsten hammers that weighed 40 kilograms each. Forging required physical strength, stamina, and technique. Strength was the foundation which increased the efficacy of one's hammering. However, one's strength would also be consumed quickly. Without a thought, Tang Wulin's arms were already in motion, readying the next strike. His two hammers descended. From the heavy silver's feedback, Tang Wulin could tell that this chunk of heavy silver was very similar to the one he had forged previously. Even its inner vein lines were similar. This familiar feeling completely filled his mind as his two hammers moved into action, hammering down on the metal like a rain squall. Bang! 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 Bang bang bang! The sound of hammering was both intense and rhythmic, a combination which gave off an extraordinary sense of beauty. Everything he had encountered since arriving in East Sea City had been strange and unfamiliar. This made him feel pressured as well as nervous. After all, he was still just a 9-year-old child. When he finally arrived at the academy, Tang Wu had to deal with bullying and was later fined as punishment for dealing with it. All of this made him feel as if he couldn't even breathe. However, before him now was a familiar chunk of heavy silver on a forging station. With the addition of the familiar rhythm of forging, he couldn't help but feel at home. As his eyes focused on the heavy silver before him, his ears twitched unceasingly, carefully listening to the feedback from his strikes. Under the pounding of his hammers, the heavy silver began to change. However, if one listened carefully, one would discover that as time passed, the sound from the pair of 1,000 refined tungsten hammers hitting the heavy silver became more and more stirring. The surveyor and Senta Yu's expressions grew serious. Tang Wulin was completely focused at this moment. Even compared to other blacksmiths already in their 20s and 30s, his level of focus was near impossible to match. A genius! This child is a genius! This thought simultaneously appeared in both their minds. Senta Yu didn't even need to look at the heavy silver. With his experience, he already knew how effective Tang Wulin's purification of the heavy silver would be. Purifying heavy silver was originally a second-rank blacksmith standard due to the excessive difficulty of purifying a metal as dense as heavy silver. It wasn't easy at all to completely purify a chunk of heavy silver. When Tang Wulin chose it, the surveyor had thought he was overestimating his abilities. However, both she and Senta Yu were moved by his demonstration just now. That was right. A demonstration. When Tang Wulin's strike caused the heavy silver to release a beautiful note, he had already passed the test to become a first-rank blacksmith. The rest was just a demonstration. But, to what degree could his demonstration reach? This was the question on the surveyor's and Senta Yu's mind. After completely immersing himself in forging, the 1,000 refined tungsten hammers were like rice straws in his hands as they continuously pounded the heavy silver. As he grew closer with that chunk of heavy silver, his hammering speed grew equally as swift. Soon after, only the flickering shadows of the unceasingly pounding hammers could be seen. The intensive pounding sounds flowed like mercury. Blacksmiths Association's third floor. The elevator's doors opened up and 2 people exited. Among these 2 people was a majestic man in his 40s who was dressed in silver-grey clothes. He wore a badge on the pit of his stomach. Regardless of who saw him, their gaze would first be attracted to that badge. That badge of his was golden in color and had a protruding hammer design on it. Above it were a total of 8 black stars. These 8 stars signified a craftsman who had attained the 8th rank within their craft, while the golden hammer represented his position as a blacksmith. An 8th rank blacksmith was an 8-star Saint Craftsman level blacksmith. In the whole Blacksmiths Association, there was only one blacksmith at this level. Beside the middle-aged man stood a girl who looked about 13 or 14 years old. She was tall and exceptionally pretty with a pair of large, bright eyes. Her golden hair was combed and put into a ponytail while she wore skin-tight clothes which made her seem very nimble. When they saw him arrive, the staff members at the front desk immediately stood up and greeted him. President. The middle-aged man nodded and said, at ease. I'm just bringing Mushi to take the second-rank test. I'd like to speak with the surveyor. This was the 8-star Saint Craftsman as well as the president of the Sun Moon Federation's East Sea City branch of the Blacksmiths Association. This was Mu Chen. Yes. Please wait a moment, President. Miss Mushi is already taking the second-rank test. She's truly worthy of being a generational genius in the blacksmithing world. Mushi's expression was undisturbed in the face of such praise. In response, she just nodded in greeting. She didn't like being called a genius. The reason she was where she was today wasn't because of her talent, but because of her efforts. Her goal was to surpass her father and become a 9th-rank divine craftsman. Throughout the Doluo continent, there were only 3 9-star divine craftsmen. Ah. What's that sound? Mu Chen raised an eyebrow as his eyes displayed a trace of astonishment. Beside him, Mushi had also raised an eyebrow as her elegant little ears trembled slightly in concentration. She immediately caught onto the sound of successive melodious, yet intense, poundings filling the air. Regardless of whether it were the rhythm or the frequency, the sounds of pounding was completely beautiful. It gave people a feeling of happiness. Mu Chen asked the staff member, has someone come to take the 4th-rank blacksmith's test? The staff member replied dumbfoundedly, no. Mu Chen pondered on it for a moment before turning to Mu Shi at his side. Head to the testing room and prepare first. I'm going to go take a look. Ian. Although Mu Shi was also curious, she still obeyed and immediately headed to the 2nd-rank testing room. She couldn't be distracted at a time like this. After separating from his daughter, Mu Chen followed the sounds of forging and quickly arrived at room number 3. This forging room had exceptional soundproofing abilities, yet, sound would still escape through the door. This type of forging sound could only come from forging an uncommon, high-density metal. Moreover, every strike didn't create any noise, signifying how accurate these strikes were. Thus, those intensive and powerful collisions meant that the blacksmith was using 1,000 refined hammers. Blacksmith ranks were very strict, with ranks directly relating to their level of achievements. If one was able to reach this level of forging, then they ought to be at the level of a grandmaster. Moreover, Mu Chen could also hear the results. As this blacksmith forged the metal, they were already in a state of harmony with it. Harmonizing was when the blacksmith builds on a resonance with the piece of metal he was crafting, until it reaches a state of fusion between both. It was in this state that the chance of producing an excellent product became higher. Every single work of forging contained both the blacksmith's feelings as well as their ideals. Mu Chen didn't enter the forging chamber because he couldn't, even as the president. Nobody was allowed into the chamber when during a blacksmith's ranking test. Entering might falter the blacksmith's concentration, thus resulting in their failure or even casting a shadow on them. How interesting. Mu Chen once again returned to the front desk, asked the staff, "What is the name of the examinee in room 3? The staff, upon his inquiry, checked through the list and answered almost immediately. The examinee's name is Tang Wulin. He was recommended here by Grandmaster Center Yu. He is currently being tested. As he spoke, he passed Mu Chen a copy of Tang Wulin's forms. When Center Yu's name was mentioned, he smiled. I say, who else other than someone recommended from Old Center would be able to enter a state of harmonization in the midst of an examination? Ah. 9 years old. With an expression of disbelief, he turned his eyes towards the staff. Are you sure this isn't a mistake of some sort? This examinee is only 9 years old. The staff confirmed immediately. That's right. We had doubts about it previously too. I couldn't believe that a child that young would come for a ranking test. Mu Chen was stupefied. For a child his age, he must be taking the first-rank blacksmith's test. Beep beep. Mu Chen removed the soul communicator from his waist belt and answered the call. Daddy, I'm ready. Are you coming? I'm in room 6. I'll be there shortly. Though he still had doubts, it didn't matter as much as his daughter. Mu Chen quickened his steps towards room 6. Time's up. The surveyor announced in a weird-sounding voice. Dang. Tang Wulin finished off his last hammer strike and retracted both his hammers. With a flash of light, his pair of hammers vanished into his heavy silver rings. His chest rose and fell gently. Tang Wulin seemed to be slightly short of breath, his cheeks scarlet with a blush, and sweat was glistening from his forehead. But that was all. The forging room was once again silent, albeit only for a short time. While the surveyor had her attention on the piece of heavy silver, Center Yu directed his gaze to Tang Wulin's eyes. In Tang Wulin's eyes, Center Yu thought he caught a hint of a glimmering silverish light that had been emitted from the heavy silver. Though the forging process had ended, Tang Wulin's focus was still in its initial stage. He believed that the child would one day grow up to become a peerless individual should he stay on the path. Heavy silver. Purification exceeding 100 refinements. Volume reduction of 7%. State of purification, 100 refined, 3 times. The surveyor announced precisely after a careful inspection of the piece of metal. If the forging was done by a Grandmaster blacksmith, getting the heavy silver to such a state wouldn't mean much. This forging, however, was done by a mere 9-year-old child whose body had not even hit puberty yet. It was an incredible feat from this child. The evaluation has passed. The surveyor announced, a gaze directed toward Center Yu. Center Yu broke into a bitter smile. Mang Qian did this on purpose. The surveyor was shocked upon hearing Center Yu's remarks. This kid is a disciple of Mang Qian. Center Yu nodded his head. I couldn't believe it either. But I now confirm that the kid is eligible for the second-rank test. The surveyor considered Center Yu's comment before turning towards Tang Wulin. Kid, other than metal purification, do you have other skills? It was then that Tang Wulin awakened from his carefree forging state. However, his only faults were hammering too lightly while using the 1,000 refined tungsten hammers, and the forging process ended a little earlier than he would have liked it to. If sufficient time was given, he was sure he could complete the 1,000 refinements. I can forge some basic small and medium-sized components, Tang Wulin described earnestly. This didn't surprise Center Yu since Tang Wulin previously mentioned it, and even Mang Qian agreed that Tang Wulin was capable of receiving jobs himself. Please forge a medium-sized component, the surveyor said with a deep voice, and if you manage to succeed, you will be promoted to the second rank. The requirements to be a second-rank blacksmith was simply to forge a medium-sized component and to have the ability to refine rare metals. Tang Wulin's previous purification process was excellent, so he only needed to forge some components now. Yes? Tang Wulin answered before immediately beginning to forge the component. The pair of 1,000 refined tungsten hammers reappeared, and rhythmic hammering sounded out once again. The surveyor was about to call out and tell Tang Wulin that he could use common metals to pass the test, but was silenced by a glance from Center Yu. He wanted to see how well a 9-year-old child could perform this task. As he hammered the chunk of heavy silver again, a surge of happiness filled Tang Wulin's heart. Within his heart, he felt as though he was reunited with his friends. At his endless pounding, the chunk of metal produced a crisp hum, as if in response to his hammering. Tang Wulin's hammering speed gradually increased. Under his hammer's pounding, the metal started to change. With every strike of his hammer, it bounced off the metal even higher. Afterwards, Tang Wulin would add even more force into his next strike. The heavy silver gradually formed into a circular-shaped medium component under his constant pounding. The hammering process that Center Yu witnessed was one without any faults, as if every strike had its place and every move was natural. In his eyes, this was the textbook's ideal of forging. This child's foundation skills were unmatched. Even if he were to be compared with 18 or 19-year-olds with an apprenticeship of more than 8 years, he would still surpass them by far. Though in this forging process, Tang Wulin simply hammered the metal without any superfluous techniques, it extruded an abnormal feeling of pureness to the bystanders. Generally, small components would be used in mecha joints, and medium components would be inlaid within the main body of the mecha. Tang Wulin had crafted a semicircular component, an important component within the knee joint of a mecha. Joint protection components were most susceptible to wear and tear, however, this also made them the most suitable to be used for soul guide arrays. Heavy silver was a good conductor for transmitting soul power. Thus, forging the joint component out of heavy silver would be the most appropriate. Tang Wulin had indeed considered these points prior to his forging. Another hour passed by before Tang Wulin produced a semicircular component that was free from any defects and brought it up to both Center Yu and the surveyor for their assessment. The two of them were even more speechless than before. Masters, did I pass the test? Tang Wulin couldn't be more proud with his piece of work. In fact, this was his first time forging a component with heavy silver. When he recalled the past, Tang Wulin thought that the only flaw to his work was that the component was not 1,000 refine med. He was confident that he would have been able to 1,000 refine it. After his previous 1,000 refinements, he discovered that his understanding of forging had gone up by a level. After forging heavy silver again, he felt that it was simply wonderful. When Tang Wulin walked out of the forging room, his face was painted with joy. It wasn't because of the recognition from both masters, nor was it because he had risen up to a second-rank blacksmith. Rather, he was euphoric from the sum of 10,000 Federation coins he received from the heavy silver component he had forged. One can actually make such a huge fortune from forging rare metals. Center Yu had informed him, prior to his exit, to report back again to the Blacksmith Association in 2 days' time to receive his blacksmith's badge, and to start receiving jobs from the association. Son with rays. Mang Qian. The call to his old acquaintance finally got through. Ian. Mang Qian's voice was just as indifferent as the time they last spoke. Where did you find yourself such a treasure? Center Yu spoke into his device impatiently. Mang Qian replied plainly, what are you talking about? Who else do you think I am referring to? Your 9-year-old, second-rank disciple. What's more shocking, he just forged a component directly with heavy silver. With his young age, he could definitely master the 1,000 refinements within a few years of serious training. With that, he would be good on his way towards a Grandmaster blacksmith. How did you train this child? Hey, can you say something? Center Yu was not pleased with the lack of response he got from Mang Qian. I have nothing to say. That child was born with innate divine strength and he has a diligent character. That's all. Mang Qian still spoke plainly. Center Yu snapped back at Mang Qian's explanation. Was your intention to brandish this kid's abilities at me when you recommended him here? Yes. Mang Qian acknowledged his true intention. Speak, what are your conditions for you to give that child to me? Since you will be at the deserted glory-bound city most of the time, do you even have time to guide your disciple? He would be better off if you let him come with me. I will guide him carefully if you trust me. I'm hanging up. Do. Bastard. Center Yu almost dropped his soul communicator out of rage. Teacher, were you looking for me? At that very moment, a youngster in his 20s walked into Center Yu's room. What blacksmith rank are you at? How many years have you been under me? Can't you even complete the 1,000 refinements? The youngster, while in a state of loss, was unfortunately the target of all of Center Yu's anger. This master of his was usually known for his good temper. Tang Wulin was, however, clueless of the impact his outstanding ability had on the others, and he was on his way back to the academy. Sun with rays. Take it. Tang Wulin pushed forth the bagful of 10,000 Federation coins to Xie, who was propped up on his bed. The bruise from Tang Wulin's punch had not subsided. Xie eyed him coldly. Are you trying to run away from the match? Tang Wulin shook his head in reply. I couldn't pay up previously because I did not have any coins. Since I ruined most of the property, I don't think you should be paying for all of it. Here is 10,000 Federation coins. I will pay you back the other 10,000 Federation coins when I have them. I am a man of my words, and since I have accepted your offer, I will be there tomorrow after school. You can set the location. Tang Wulin left the bunch of coins next to Xie and headed for his bed after stating his intentions. Zhu Zhangxi and Yun Xiao exchanged a glance as they observed the exchange from the top bunks. Ever since his defeat against Tang Wulin in the steamed bun eating contest, Zhu Zhangxi's attitude towards Tang Wulin had changed. Yun Xiao, on the other hand, was curious at how Tang Wulin managed to produce the 10,000 Federation coins. It seemed impossible for him to get such huge sum within this short span of time. Tang Wulin entered a meditative state easily after moving into his cross-legged posture on his bed. In fact, today was his first time using his martial soul in battle. He didn't have any experience in these matters, and this was even the first true battle he had been in. Tang Wulin felt that Xie was a formidable person. If he hadn't used his blue-silver grass's soul skill, his skills alone wouldn't stand a chance in withstanding Xie. From the fight earlier today, he gained some understanding of his own martial soul too. He recalled the advice his teacher had given him, and agreed that he truly needed to improve his control over his blue-silver grass. Xie, however, merely laid down on his bed. His mind was filled with images of the match earlier today as well, specifically on his inability to cut the grass with his light dragon dagger. Is Tang Wulin's martial soul really just blue-silver grass? Did I underestimate the ability of Tang Wulin's trash martial soul? I will show him my true colors in the match tomorrow. I will make him pay for that punch. As he thought this, Xie touched his swollen cheeks, reigniting his heart's fury. Meditation should be done prior to and after dinner. After all, the clumsy bird flies early for the forest. This saying had left a deep impression in Tang Wulin's mind. Sun with rays. Dawn. Tang Wulin woke up as soon as the first rays of sunlight poked at him through the windows. A night of meditation did help in recovering some of his soul power. As soon as he entered rank 10, he had felt a distinct difference in the time needed to regain his energy. At the same time, he would need more soul power to advance to the next stages. This required him to use far more time to accumulate the amount. As he got off his bed, his gaze rested unintentionally on the occupant within the lower bunk of the other set of beds across the room. Xie, who seemed to be meditating, opened his eyes suddenly. Both pairs of eyes locked for a few moments. Xie's gaze was frosty, whereas Tang Wulin had a look of indifference. Shortly after, Tang Wulin broke his gaze and headed for the shower. In his opinion, Xie was just another wealthy city kid. He gave off an image of bossiness, assertiveness, and insolence. Tang Wulin would rather make friends with Zhu Zhangxi than the rich city kid. After finishing his morning shower, there was nothing else to stop him from the most important activity of all, meal time. However, Tang Wulin was unaware that his previous challenge in steamed bun eating had earned him the nickname of Rice Bucket, even though he hadn't even started his journey in the academy. As he woke up earlier than others, he was greeted with an empty dining hall. Within the hall were the same 3 windows. Breakfast was, like previous meals, categorized into 3 categories. Tang Wulin naturally headed for the 3rd window, which provided free food. Breakfast was a spread of milk, eggs, sausages, bread, and vegetables. Tang Wulin helped himself and piled up a pyramid's worth of food on his plate before leaving for an empty table at the corner to devour his food. The dining hall's chef recognized Tang Wulin for his record-breaking appetite and was worried that the child's stomach could not take up all the food. But he now knew that the child was doing fine when he caught view of Tang Wulin's actions through the window. Xie entered the dining hall just when Tang Wulin started with his meal. Like Tang Wulin, his mind had already been made up and he headed straight for the 1st window, collecting a plateful of food as well. One would think that the food on Xie's plate was similar to Tang Wulin's from a mere glance. A closer inspection, however, would make one realize the difference. Take for instance the milk. It was not just any milk, but one that was taken from a soul beast bred in captivity. As with the other food on his plate, they contained a higher amount of nutrients, all from various origins. But if one were to compare the portions of rice consumed between the 2, he would realize that Tang Wulin's portion was as much or even more than 10 times that of what Xie had on his plate. Though both of them were seated far apart, each in solitude, Xie kept glancing occasionally in Tang Wulin's direction. Tang Wulin was, however, concentrated on the breakfast before him. The dining hall grew crowded as students began entering. Just like how it was the night before, they started pointing and directing their comments at Tang Wulin. As the sun rose high, the opening ceremony started. This video will end here.